The ion storm came without warning. Kalen Reeves had been following the usual protocols, maintaining a standard orbit around Xylos, while his sensors collected preliminary data on the jungle planet's extraordinary bioluminescent ecosystem. One moment, his research vessel's systems were functioning normally. The next, warning lights flashed across his console as a massive surge of electromagnetic energy engulfed the ship. System failure imminent. The ship's AI announced with mechanical calm. Emergency landing procedures initiated. Kalen's knuckles whitened as he gripped the manual controls, fighting to stabilize the descent. The ship plunged through the atmosphere, the hull groaning in protest. Through the viewport, he caught glimpses of the planet's surface, a sea of pulsing, glowing vegetation in blues, purples, and vibrant greens. "Just need to clear that ridge," he muttered, pulling back on the controls with all his strength. The engine screamed, and for a moment, it seemed he might succeed. Then a final power surge blew out the navigation systems. The last thing Kalen saw was a wall of bioluminescent trees rushing toward him. He awoke to pain and the rich, alien scent of Xylos' jungle. The crash had broken through the canopy, creating a jagged wound in the otherwise dense forest ceiling. Shafts of alien sunlight, tinged slightly green by the planet's atmosphere, filtered down to where his ship now rested, crumpled and smoking. Kalen took inventory. Several lacerations, possibly a cracked rib, but nothing life-threatening. His exosuit had protected him from the worst of the impact. The ship, however, was another matter. The main power core was compromised, the communications array destroyed. He was stranded. Priority 1. Salvage equipment, he told himself, forcing his body to move despite the pain. Years of training took over as he methodically gathered his survival kit, portable scanner, and as many functional tools as he could salvage from the wreckage. By the time dusk approached, Kalen had established a makeshift camp near the crash site. He'd set up perimeter sensors to warn of approaching predators. Xylos was notorious for its dangerous fauna, though little concrete information existed in the databases. As night fell fully, the jungle erupted into a symphony of pulsating light. The bioluminescent plants intensified their glow, casting eerie shadows that danced across the forest floor. Kalen was cataloging a particularly fascinating species of fern whose fronds emitted a steady blue light when his perimeter alarm vibrated against his wrist. Something was approaching from the west. He froze, reaching slowly for the pulse pistol at his side. The scanner showed a heat signature, large, moving with purpose. Predator, not prey. He caught a flash of movement through the undergrowth, something sleek and powerful slipping between the glowing plants. Then nothing. Kalen's breath came in short, controlled bursts as he scanned the jungle. The heat signature had disappeared from his scanner, which could only mean one thing. Whatever was stalking him knew about technology and had found a way to mask its presence. This was no ordinary animal. "I know you're there," he called out, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "I'm not looking for trouble." A low, rumbling sound, something between a growl and a hiss, emanated from the darkness to his left. Kalen turned slowly, pistol raised. "I said I'm not." The attack came from the right, the opposite direction from the sound. A blur of motion, too fast to track, and Kalen found himself pinned to the ground, staring up into the most alien, yet strangely beautiful face he had ever seen. The creature, no, person, straddling his chest had distinctly feline features. Almond-shaped eyes with vertical pupils that glowed amber in the bioluminescent light, a slightly flattened nose, and high cheekbones dusted with what looked like scales rather than fur. Her skin was a deep olive tone with patches of iridescent scales along her temples and jawline. Pointed ears flicked backwards in an obvious display of aggression, and when she bared her teeth, he saw sharp canines. "Your kind is not welcome here," she snarled, pressing the tip of a wicked-looking knife against his throat. Her voice was accented, but her command of the galactic standard language was perfect. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't gut you right now." "I'm a botanist," Kalen replied, keeping his voice calm despite the blade against his skin. "A researcher." My ship crashed during an ion storm. I'm not here to harm anything or anyone. Her eyes narrowed, pupils contracting to thin slits. Lies. You're with them. The miners. The hunters. I'm not, Kalen insisted. Check my ship. My equipment. I study plants, not exploit resources. I have no weapons except this defensive pistol. She studied him for a long moment, nostrils flaring slightly as if scenting the truth on him. Finally, she eased the pressure of the knife, though she didn't remove it entirely. If you're lying, I'll know, she said. And if you're lying, you're dead. Kalen nodded carefully, mindful of the blade. I understand. What's your name? Her eyes flashed. Names have power. You haven't earned mine. Fair enough. I'm Kalen Reeves, botanical researcher from Earth Colonial Scientific Division. She made a sound that might have been contempt. Earth, the world that devours other worlds. In one fluid motion, she stood and backed away, knife still pointed at him. Get up. Slowly, Kalen complied, noting the way she moved, balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet, ready to spring in any direction. Her clothing was a combination of what looked like handcrafted leather and some kind of synthetic material, possibly salvaged from previous visitors to the planet. The outfit provided protection while allowing for maximum mobility. Your species, he ventured. I've never seen anyone quite like you before. And you won't again if you make any sudden moves, she replied. My ancestors adapted to Xylos. We belong here. You don't. You're right, Kalen admitted. I don't belong here, but I'm stranded until I can repair my communications equipment. I'm not your enemy. She circled him like a predator assessing prey. Everyone from the stars is an enemy until proven otherwise. Your people come, they take, they destroy. They hunt us. Not me, Kalen insisted. I'm a scientist. I observe. I learn. I don't destroy. A sudden, deafening roar interrupted their standoff. The woman's head snapped toward the sound, ears flattening against her skull. Vrastrix, she hissed. We need to move. Now. What of Vrastrix? Kalen asked, already gathering his most essential equipment. Death, she replied simply. If we stay, we die. The ground beneath them began to tremble. Through the trees, Kalen caught a glimpse of something massive moving toward them. A creature at least 3 meters tall with multiple limbs and what looked like armored plates covering its body. Its roar came again, shaking leaves from the bioluminescent plants around them. This way, the woman commanded, sprinting toward a dense patch of foliage. Kalen followed without question, adrenaline overriding the pain of his injuries. They ran through the jungle, the woman leading with unerring confidence despite the darkness. The bioluminescence provided just enough light to avoid the worst obstacles, but Kalen stumbled several times and used to the terrain. Behind them, the crashing sounds of the predator grew louder. It's gaining on us, Kalen gasped. Shut up and run, she snapped, vaulting over a fallen tree trunk. They burst into a clearing where the ground suddenly dropped away into a ravine. At the bottom, a river of glowing blue liquid, not water, Kalen's scientific mind noted, flowed swiftly. The woman didn't hesitate. She grabbed Kalen's arm. Jump, she ordered. Are you insane? We don't know what that substance is. It's not toxic. Jump or die. The Vrastrix crashed through the trees behind them, its massive form now fully visible. A nightmarish combination of insect and reptile, with multiple compound eyes and a jaw that split into 4 sections, each lined with serrated teeth. Kalen made his decision. They jumped together. The glowing liquid engulfed them, surprisingly warm against Kalen's skin. It was more viscous than water, slowing their descent enough to prevent injury. The woman pulled him toward the far bank, swimming with powerful strokes. Behind them, the Vrastrix roared in frustration from the edge of the ravine. It won't follow, she explained as they dragged themselves onto the shore. The luminous river burns its exoskeleton. Kalen took a moment to examine the substance coating his exosuit. Fascinating. It appears to be a bioluminescent algae suspended in a nutrient-rich solution. The chemical composition must be. Save your research for when we're not being hunted, she interrupted, already moving into the jungle. The Vrastrix will look for another crossing point. They traveled in tense silence for what felt like hours, moving deeper into the jungle. The bioluminescence grew more intense here, with entire groves of trees pulsating in synchronized patterns of light. Under different circumstances, Kalen would have been ecstatic at the scientific discoveries surrounding him. Now, he focused only on keeping pace with his mysterious guide. Finally, she stopped in a small clearing surrounded by tall, mushroom-like plants whose caps emitted a soft purple glow. "We'll rest here," she said. Temporarily, Kalen sank gratefully to the ground, his legs trembling with exhaustion. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my life back there." She gave him a long, evaluating look. "Don't thank me yet. You're still an intruder on my territory." "I understand your caution," Kalen replied, "but I meant what I said. I'm a researcher, not an exploiter." She crouched beside a particular plant, running her fingers along its stem in a specific pattern. In response, the plant's luminescence dimmed, creating a shadowy pocket in the clearing. "Prove it," she challenged. "What do you know about our world? About Xylos?" Kalen considered his answer carefully. "Officially? Not much. Xylos is classified as a Category 3 bioreserve, marked for scientific study but not colonization. The unique bioluminescent ecosystem is believed to be the result of an unusual interaction between the planet's magnetic field and certain mineral deposits in the soil. The flora has evolved to harness this energy for photosynthesis even in low-light conditions." He paused, watching her reaction. When she remained silent, he continued, "What isn't in the official records is the presence of intelligent indigenous life, people like you. If the colonial authority knew, they would have classified Xylos differently. Or they would have sent more hunters," she replied bitterly. "More miners. More takers. Not all humans are the same," Kalen said quietly. "Perhaps not, but enough are." She sat across from him, knife still in hand, but no longer pointed at him. "Progress of a sort. You may call me Lyra. It is not my true name, but it will serve." "Thank you, Lyra. I appreciate the gesture of trust." She snorted. "It's not trust. It's pragmatism. If the Vrastrix doesn't get you, something else will. And I've decided I want answers before you die." "Charming," Kalen muttered. A ghost of a smile flickered across Lyra's face before disappearing. "Rest. You'll need your strength tomorrow." Despite his exhaustion, Kalen found sleep elusive. He watched as Lyra settled into a curious position, not quite lying down, her body curled in a way that reminded him of a cat, yet poised to spring up at the slightest disturbance. Her eyes, which caught and reflected the bioluminescent light around them, remained fixed on him until eventually his own closed in sleep. He awoke to the sound of Lyra hissing in pain. Dawn had broken, casting the jungle in an eerie combination of natural light and bioluminescence. Lyra sat at the edge of the clearing, examining her right arm. Even from a distance, Kalen could see an angry red wound just below her elbow. "You're hurt," he said, approaching cautiously. "It's nothing," she growled. "A thorn from a poison spiral caught me during our escape." Kalen knelt beside her, medical training kicking in. "Let me see." "No." She pulled away, ears flattening defensively. "Lyra, if it's poisonous." "I said no." Kalen sighed. "Fine. Suffer needlessly. But my medical kit has universal antitoxins and tissue regenerators. Your choice." She eyed him suspiciously before slowly extending her arm. The wound was worse than he'd thought, an angry puncture surrounded by discolored tissue. Small purple lines were already spreading outward from the center. "This looks bad," he said, opening his kit. "How long ago did this happen?" "During the night. The poison spiral's thorns only activate when the sun rises." She watched intently as he prepared a hypo spray. "What is that?" "Broad-spectrum antitoxin," Kalen explained. "It should neutralize most organic poisons. Then I'll need to extract the thorn fragment that's still embedded in your arm." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "How do I know you won't poison me further?" "Because I would have been dead 10 times over already if you wanted to kill me," Kalen replied evenly. "And because logic suggests if I wanted you dead, I could simply do nothing and let that poison do its work. She considered this, then nodded once. Proceed. Kalen administered the antitoxin, then examined the wound more closely. There's definitely something still in there. I'll need to remove it, and it's going to hurt. Pain is a teacher, Lyra said stoically. Do what you must. He prepared a small surgical extractor from his kit. As he positioned it over the wound, Lyra's eyes locked onto his. The intensity of her gaze was unsettling. If you keep looking at me like that, I'll pounce, she warned. Now hurry and get the thorn out. Kalen blinked in surprise, then focused on the task. With a quick, precise movement, he extracted a sliver of iridescent material from the wound. Lyra didn't flinch, but he could feel the tension in her muscles. Got it, he announced, placing the thorn in a specimen container. Fascinating structure. The barbs are microscopic but incredibly effective at embedding in tissue. Yes, fascinating, Lyra said dryly. Now finish. He cleaned the wound and applied a regenerative patch. This will accelerate healing and prevent infection. The discoloration should fade within hours if the antitoxin is working properly. Lyra examined his work with a critical eye. Your medical skills are adequate. Kalen laughed. High praise indeed. You're welcome, by the way. She stood abruptly. We need to move. It's not safe to stay in one place too long. Where are we going? Away from your crash site. It will attract scavengers, both animal and otherwise. She began gathering what few possessions she had. Can you travel, or will your fragile human body slow us down? I'll manage, Kalen replied, repacking his own equipment. Though I should mention that my fragile human body just saved your arm, possibly your life. Lyra paused, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, she inclined her head in what might have been acknowledgement. You have some uses. Cool, mate. They traveled through the jungle for most of the day, Lyra setting a punishing pace. Kalen studied the terrain and vegetation as they moved, making mental notes for his research. The ecosystem of Xylos was even more extraordinary than the reports had suggested. Plants responded to their presence, some curling away defensively, others extending curious tendrils toward them. The bioluminescence, though dimmed during daylight, never fully disappeared. By midday, they had entered a region where the trees grew impossibly tall, their trunks as wide as buildings. The canopy was so dense that the forest floor existed in a perpetual twilight, causing the bioluminescent undergrowth to shine more brightly. This is the old growth, Lyra explained without prompting. Some of these trees are thousands of your Earth years old. They remember when the first star travelers came. Plants don't have memory in the way you're suggesting, Kalen said automatically, then caught himself. At least, Earth plants don't. Is that different here? Lyra gave him a look that suggested he was particularly dense. Everything on Xylos is connected. The light, the soil, the water, the air. All part of one greater organism. My people understood this from the beginning. Yours never will. Before Kalen could respond, a distant sound caught their attention. A mechanical whine that didn't belong in the jungle. Lyra froze, ears swiveling toward the noise. Down, she hissed, pulling Kalen into a dense thicket. They lay motionless as the sound grew louder. A moment later, a sleek black drone zipped through the trees, hovering occasionally to scan the area. Its design was unlike anything in Earth's scientific fleet. What is that? Kalen whispered. Hunters, Lyra replied, her voice tight with hatred. They've been increasing their patrols lately, taking more and more from the forest. Animals, plants, minerals. Even my people, when they can catch us. The drone passed close to their hiding place. Kalen held his breath, hoping the thicket's dense foliage would block their heat signatures. After what seemed like an eternity, the drone moved on, the sound of its engines fading into the distance. Who are they? Kalen asked once it was safe to speak. Neocorp Extraction. Lyra spat the name like a curse. They operate beyond the edge of your colonial authority's jurisdiction, answering to no one but profit. They discovered Xylos 3 years ago and have been bleeding it dry ever since. Kalen's mind raced. That's impossible. Xylos is a protected bioreserve. There would be records, permits. Your bureaucracy means nothing out here, Lyra interrupted. They come with their machines and their weapons. They take what they want, and they leave nothing but destruction. Why haven't your people fought back? A shadow passed over Lyra's face. We did. My clan, my family, we defended our territory. They came with fire and steel and strange weapons that turned our own bodies against us. She looked away. I'm the last of my bloodline now. The gravity of her words hung in the air between them. Kalen felt an unexpected surge of anger on her behalf. I'm sorry, he said simply. Lyra's eyes met his, searching for insincerity and finding none. Your sorrow changes nothing, but your presence might. If Neocorp discovers a colonial scientist on Xylos, they might retreat rather than risk exposure. Or they might eliminate the witness, Kalen pointed out. That too, Lyra agreed with grim practicality. We need to keep moving. The drone might return with others. They traveled more cautiously now, Lyra leading them through increasingly difficult terrain. Dense thickets, swampy areas where the bioluminescent algae grew, so thick it created slippery, glowing pools, rocky outcroppings that required careful climbing. By late afternoon, Kalen was exhausted, his injuries from the crash making themselves known with every step. We need to rest, he finally admitted. Just for a few minutes. Lyra looked as if she might argue, then nodded reluctantly. Briefly, there's a safe place nearby. This safe place turned out to be a small cave hidden behind a waterfall of the same glowing blue liquid they'd encountered in the river. Lyra manipulated what looked like natural rock formations near the entrance, and a bioluminescent barrier sealed the opening, visible from inside, but appearing as solid stone from outside. Impressive, Kalen said, sinking gratefully to the cave floor. Natural or artificial? Both, Lyra replied, cryptically. My people learned to work with Xylos, not against it. The jungle provides if you know how to ask. The cave interior was surprisingly comfortable, with smooth walls covered in a soft, moss-like growth that emitted a gentle blue glow. In one corner, Kalen spotted what appeared to be stored supplies. Containers made from woven plant fibers and cured animal skins. Is this your home? He asked. Lyra shook her head. One many shelters. I move regularly to avoid detection. The slip wasn't lost on Kalen, but he chose not to comment on it. Instead, he took the opportunity to check his own injuries. The cracked rib was painful but stable, and the cuts were healing well thanks to the medical patches he'd applied. His biggest concern was the rapidly dwindling supply of nutritional supplements in his survival kit. He would need to find local food sources soon, assuming anything on Xylos was compatible with human digestion. As if reading his thoughts, Lyra approached with a small container. Eat, she said, offering him what looked like dried fruits and some kind of jerky. It's safe for your kind. Star travelers before you have eaten it without illness. Kalen accepted the food gratefully. Thank you. My supplies are limited. I know. I examined your pack while you slept last night. At his startled look, she shrugged unapologetically. Knowledge is survival. The food was strange but not unpleasant. The fruit tangy and sweet, the meat gamey but rich. As they ate in companionable silence, Kalen noticed Lyra periodically checking her arm where the thorn had been. The discoloration had indeed faded, just as he'd predicted. Feeling better? He asked. She flexed her arm experimentally. Yes, your medicine is effective. High praise indeed, Kalen smiled. A brief silence fell between them, more comfortable than their previous interactions. Finally, Lyra spoke. Why did you come to Xylos, truly? One scientist alone in a small ship. It's unusual. Kalen considered his answer carefully. The official mission was preliminary botanical research, cataloging species, collecting samples, standard procedures. But personally, I volunteered because Xylos represents something increasingly rare, a world untouched by extensive human influence, a place where life evolved along a completely different path. Until now, Lyra said pointedly. Until Neocorp, Kalen corrected. My presence here would have been temporary, minimally invasive. I observe, I learn, I leave everything intact. Noble intentions, Lyra commented, though her tone wasn't entirely sarcastic. And now, stranded on a hostile world with a hostile guide. Now I need to warn the Colonial Authority about Neocorp's illegal activities, Kalen said firmly. And find a way off this planet, preferably with evidence of what they're doing. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Perhaps our interests align temporarily, Star Traveler. Neocorp has established a main extraction facility 3 days' journey from here. If we could infiltrate it, you might find your communication equipment, and I might find a way to hurt them. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Kalen observed. Existence is dangerous, Lyra replied simply. Rest now. Tomorrow, we hunt the hunters. The journey to Neocorp's facility proved even more treacherous than Kalen had anticipated. The terrain grew increasingly unstable as they approached what Lyra called the Wounded Lands, areas where extensive mining had damaged the ecosystem. The bioluminescence dimmed here, plants withered, and strange, acrid smells permeated the air. They encountered 2 more drone patrols and once had to hide for hours in a hollow tree trunk while a heavily armed ground team passed nearby. Lyra grew increasingly tense as they progressed, her movements more guarded, her normally fluid grace becoming rigid with vigilance. On the evening of the second day, they crested a ridge and saw it, a sprawling industrial complex carved into the side of a mountain. Massive excavation equipment dug into the earth, while processing facilities belched smoke into Xylos's pristine atmosphere. The contrast between the natural bioluminescence of the jungle and the harsh artificial lights of the facility was jarring. There, Lyra whispered, pointing to a section on the far side. That's where they keep their communication equipment and transport ships. Kalen examined the facility through a scanner. Heavy security, automated defenses, personnel with military-grade weapons, sensor arrays covering all approaches. Yes, Lyra agreed. A frontal assault would be suicide. I wasn't suggesting one, Kalen replied. I'm a botanist, not a commando. Lyra's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. Good, because I have a better plan. She pointed to a series of large pipes extending from the facility into the jungle. Waste disposal. They pumped their chemical runoff directly into the forest. The pipes lead back into the facility. You want us to infiltrate through the waste pipes? Kalen asked incredulously. That's your plan? Unless you prefer walking through the front entrance, Lyra challenged. Kalen sighed. Point taken. When do we move? After dark. The night shift has fewer personnel, and the bioluminescence will provide cover for our approach. They retreated to a safe distance to wait for nightfall. As they prepared their equipment, checking weapons and supplies, Kalen noticed Lyra performing what appeared to be a ritual, applying patterns of bioluminescent paste to her face and arms in intricate designs. War markings, she explained when she caught him watching. For protection and strength. May I? Kalen asked, gesturing to the paste. Lyra seemed surprised by the request, but nodded. With careful fingers, she applied the markings to his face, her touch unexpectedly gentle. The paste felt cool against his skin and emitted a faint, pleasant scent like crushed herbs. Now Xylos will recognize you as an ally, not an invader, she said softly, her face closer to his than it had ever been. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection deeper than words. The moment broke when Lyra stood abruptly. It's time. They made their approach when the facility's lights dimmed for the night cycle. The waste pipes were exactly as Lyra had described, large enough to navigate and poorly monitored. The liquid flowing through them was toxic but shallow, allowing them to wade through without protective gear beyond what they already wore. The smell is intense, Kalen commented, trying to breathe through his mouth. Focus on the goal, not the journey, Lyra advised, though he noticed her own nose wrinkled in disgust. They followed the pipe system inward, using Kalen's scanner to avoid security checkpoints. Eventually, they reached a maintenance junction where multiple pipes converged. Above them, a service hatch led into the facility proper. Ready, Lyra whispered. Kalen nodded, fighting down his anxiety. Ready. The interior of the facility was clinically sterile compared to the jungle outside. All metal and composite materials in efficient, minimalist designs. They moved silently through maintenance corridors, dodging the occasional worker by ducking into storage rooms or vacant offices. The communications center should be one level up, Kalen whispered, checking his scanner. And there appears to be a central data hub nearby. If we can access it, we might find evidence of their illegal operations. Data won't help my people, Lyra replied tersely. I need to find their main extraction control center. If I can sabotage it, their operations will be crippled for months. We should stick together, Kalen argued. No. 2 objectives, 2 paths. We'll meet back at the waste junction in 1 hour. If either of us doesn't return, the other doesn't wait. Her tone brooked no argument. Before Kalen could protest further, she pressed something into his hand, a small carving made from what looked like bone, inscribed with symbols similar to her war markings. For protection, she said simply, then disappeared down a side corridor with predatory stealth. Kalen stared after her for a moment before tucking the talisman into a secure pocket. Focus on the mission, he told himself, and moved toward the communications center. The facility was surprisingly understaffed, confirming Lyra's assessment of the night shift. Kalen encountered only minimal resistance. A security guard he managed to avoid, an automated checkpoint he bypassed using his scientific credentials. His Earth Colonial Authority, while not officially recognized in this illegal operation, still opened doors programmed to respect certain access codes. The communications center was deserted except for a single technician who was easily distracted when Kalen triggered a minor system fault in a different section. With the room to himself, he worked quickly, establishing a secure channel to the nearest colonial outpost. This is researcher Kalen Reeves, ID KR 7729, BSC, declaring an emergency situation on planet Xylos, Sector 9 Gamma, he transmitted. Illegal extraction operation in progress by NeoCorp Enterprises. Indigenous sentient population under threat. Requesting immediate intervention. Attaching coordinates and preliminary evidence. He had just finished uploading a data packet containing his findings when an alarm blared throughout the facility. On the security monitors, he saw chaos erupting in the extraction control center. Fires, panicked workers, emergency protocols activating. Lyra had succeeded in her mission. Too well, perhaps. The facility was now on high alert, and armed security teams were mobilizing. Kalen's escape route would be cut off within minutes. He was about to flee when another alert caught his attention, a quarantine procedure activating in the biological research wing. On the monitor, he saw hazmat-suited scientists rushing to secure containment units filled with people, or rather, individuals like Lyra, captured indigenous inhabitants being treated as test subjects. Kalen felt sick. This wasn't just illegal mining. It was something far worse. Without hesitation, he overrode the containment protocols, triggering an emergency release of all secure units. It wouldn't free the prisoners completely, but it would give them a fighting chance if they were conscious and able. With security converging on multiple crises, Kalen made his escape, running through increasingly chaotic corridors toward the rendezvous point. He had nearly reached it when he heard gunfire echoing from nearby, energy weapons discharging repeatedly. Against his better judgment, he headed toward the sound. He found Lyra backed into a corner, facing off against 3 armed guards. She had already incapacitated 2 others, who lay motionless on the floor, but she was bleeding from a wound in her shoulder and favoring her left leg. The guards were closing in, weapons raised. Without thinking, Kalen fired his pulse pistol, hitting one guard squarely between the shoulder blades. The man dropped, and the other 2 whirled to face this new threat, giving Lyra the opening she needed. She launched herself at one, a blur of motion and fury, while Kalen exchanged fire with the third. When it was over, all 5 guards were down, and Lyra was leaning heavily against the wall, breathing hard. "You should have gone to the rendezvous," she said, but there was no real anger in her voice. "You're welcome," Kalen replied, moving to support her. "Can you walk?" "I can fight," she countered, though she accepted his help, which is more relevant at the moment. They made their way back to the waste junction, pursued by the sound of alarms and distant shouting. The facility was in full emergency mode now. Lyra's sabotage had apparently triggered a cascade of systems failures that were spreading throughout the complex. "What did you do?" Kaelin asked as they descended into the pipe system. Lyra's smile was fierce. "I introduced the facility's systems to Xylos. The jungle is now communicating directly with their computers. They are incompatible." They splashed through the waste channel, moving as quickly as Lyra's injuries would allow. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as the chaos in the facility demanded more immediate attention. They had nearly reached the exit when Lyra stumbled, her strength finally failing. Kaelin caught her before she fell into the toxic sludge, lifting her into his arms despite her weak protests. "Put me down," she insisted. "I can walk." "Clearly," Kaelin retorted, continuing forward. "Just as I can fly. Let me help you, as you've helped me." She fell silent, her body tense in his arms, but no longer resisting. When they finally emerged into the jungle, the facility behind them was in full meltdown, explosions echoing across the valley, emergency shuttles launching erratically, the artificial lights flickering and dying in sections. Kaelin carried Lyra deep into the cover of the bioluminescent forest before setting her down on a bed of soft moss. Her injuries were worse than he'd initially thought. The energy weapon had burned through her shoulder, and her leg bore a deep gash that was still bleeding steadily. "Hold still," he instructed, opening his medical kit. "This is going to hurt." "Pain is nothing new," Lyra said through gritted teeth, her pupils dilated with shock. "Just be quick." Kaelin worked methodically, cleaning the wounds and applying regenerative patches as he had for the Thorn injury days before. This time, however, the damage was more severe. The shoulder wound had cauterized itself to some extent, but the leg injury was concerning, deep enough to have damaged muscle tissue. "I need to close this properly," he told her, preparing a dermal sealer. "My kit isn't meant for injuries this serious, but it should stabilize you until we can reach better shelter." Lyra watched him work, her expression guarded, but less hostile than in their earlier encounters. "You came back for me," she said quietly. "Why?" Kaelin's hands paused briefly before continuing their work. "The same reason you led me away from the Vrastrix instead of leaving me to die. Some things transcend old hatreds and suspicions." "And what things are those, Star Traveler?" "Basic decency. Recognition of another thinking, feeling being." He finished sealing the leg wound and sat back. "Maybe even friendship, if you can tolerate the concept." Lyra's lips curved slightly. "Friendship with a human. My ancestors would be appalled." "Mine too. Probably," Kaelin admitted with a small smile. "Though for entirely different reasons." "Can you stand?" Together, they managed to get Lyra upright, though. She needed to lean heavily on Kaelin for support. The jungle around them seemed to respond to their presence, the bioluminescent plants brightening along their path, almost as if creating a trail for them to follow. "The forest recognizes you," Kaelin observed. "Those markings you applied, they're more than symbolic, aren't they? They contain compounds that interact with Xylos' ecosystem," Lyra explained, her voice strained from the effort of moving. "A biological key, unlocking certain responses. My people discovered the process generations ago. They traveled slowly through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the Neocorp facility. Behind them, the occasional distant explosion suggested that Lyra's sabotage was still wreaking havoc. Kaelin's scanner occasionally picked up the signatures of pursuit vehicles, but they seemed disorganized, searching in wrong directions. By dawn, they had reached a region of the jungle Kaelin hadn't seen before, where the massive trees grew so close together that their trunks sometimes fused, creating natural archways and chambers. The bioluminescence here was subdued, more purple than blue, casting everything in a dreamlike glow. "We're entering the heart," Lyra said, her voice reverent despite her pain. "Few outsiders have ever seen this place." "The heart of what?" Kaelin asked. "The heart of Xylos. the center from which all life on this world flows. She gestured weakly toward a particularly massive tree ahead. There, that's where we need to go. The tree in question dwarfed everything around it, its trunk at least 30 meters in diameter. As they approached, Kalen noticed that the bark wasn't solid but composed of thousands of smaller plants growing in symbiosis, creating a living tapestry of light and texture. At the base, an opening was visible, an archway created by two enormous roots that curved upward before plunging back into the ground. Inside was a hollow chamber large enough to house a small village. The interior walls pulsed with bioluminescence, and the floor was carpeted with soft, moss-like growth. In the center stood what appeared to be ruins, ancient structures made of a crystalline material that caught and amplified the bioluminescent light. But what truly shocked Kalen was the presence of others like Lyra, about 24 individuals with the same feline/reptilian features, dressed in similar adaptive clothing, all watching their approach with expressions ranging from hostility to curiosity. "You said you were the last of your bloodline," Kalen whispered to Lyra. "I am," she replied softly. "These are the remains of other clans. Survivors like me." An older male stepped forward, his scales more prominent than Lyra's, his posture radiating authority despite his apparent age. "Lyra of the Shadow Claw," he said, his voice resonant in the chamber. "You bring a star traveler to our last sanctuary?" "Elder Tarek," Lyra inclined her head respectfully. "This human is not our enemy. He helped me strike against Neocorp. Their main facility is crippled, at least temporarily." Murmurs spread through the gathered survivors at this news. Elder Tarek studied Kalen with unblinking amber eyes. "And what does this human want in return for his assistance?" he asked. "Our secrets? Our resources? Our submission?" Kalen stepped forward, supporting Lyra more firmly as he felt her strength waning. "What I want, Elder, is medical attention for Lyra. She's badly injured. After that, I want to help stop Neocorp permanently. I've sent a distress signal to the Colonial Authority with evidence of their illegal activities, but I don't know if it was received or how long a response might take." Elder Tarek's gaze intensified. "You would bring more star travelers to Xylos." "I would bring justice," Kalen replied steadily. "What Neocorp is doing violates not only your sovereignty, but colonial law. They're exploiting resources, endangering indigenous sentient life, and I discovered they're even capturing your people for experimentation. That's not just illegal, it's monstrous." Before Elder Tarek could respond, Lyra stumbled, her injuries finally overwhelming her. Kalen caught her, his concern overriding any diplomatic considerations. "Please," he said urgently. "She needs help now. Debate my intentions later." Something in his desperation must have convinced the elder. With a quick gesture, Tarek summoned two younger individuals who took Lyra from Kalen's arms with surprising gentleness, carrying her toward an alcove in the chamber wall. "Our healers will tend to her," Tarek said. "You will remain here, under guard, until she awakens and can speak for you more fully." Kalen nodded, understanding the precaution. He watched anxiously as they carried Lyra away, only turning back to Elder Tarek when she was out of sight. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet, human," the elder replied. "Your presence here puts us all at risk. If Lyra's judgment proves faulty, the consequences will be significant." With that ominous statement, Tarek withdrew, leaving Kalen under the watchful eyes of four guards whose expressions suggested they would welcome any excuse to remove the human intruder permanently. Hours passed. Kalen was permitted to sit on a stone bench near the center of the chamber, but was prevented from exploring or approaching any of the other inhabitants. He used the time to examine his surroundings more carefully, his scientific curiosity overriding his precarious situation. The ruins in the center appeared to be thousands of years old, yet the technology they represented seemed advanced. Crystalline structures with geometric precision, surfaces etched with what might be circuitry or writing. They reminded him of something he'd seen in xenoarchaeological journals, but he couldn't place the reference. Eventually, a younger member of the community approached, a female with unusually bright markings who carried a container of what appeared to be food and water. "You should eat," she said, her manner more curious than hostile. "The healers say Lyra will recover, but she needs rest. The elder sleep medicine will keep her unconscious until morning." Kaelin accepted the offerings gratefully. "Thank you. May I ask your name?" "Naya," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "I was curious about you. We have stories of humans, but they are not pleasant tales." "I can imagine," Kaelin said. "But not all humans are the same, just as I suspect not all of your people are identical in thought and character." Naya considered this, then settled on the bench beside him, though at a careful distance. "Lyra has always been different, more willing to take risks. When the others refused to fight back against the invaders, she continued alone. Her tone held both admiration and concern. She lost everyone, her parents, her siblings, her mate." "Her mate?" Kaelin asked, feeling an unexpected twinge at this information. Naya nodded. "They were taken in a raid 2 seasons ago. We believe they were among those sent to the stars for study, the ones who never return." She gestured toward the food. "Eat. It is safe for your kind." Kaelin complied, finding the food similar to what Lyra had shared earlier, strange but palatable. As he ate, Naya asked questions about Earth, about human society, about the stars. Her curiosity was as boundless as her knowledge was limited, and Kaelin found himself enjoying the conversation despite his concerns for Lyra. "These ruins," he eventually asked, gesturing to the crystalline structures. "What are they?" Naya's expression grew solemn. "The first ones. They came to Xylos long ago, before my people evolved our current form. They shaped the world, accelerated our development, then departed." She touched one of the crystal formations reverently. "They left these connections to help us communicate with Xylos itself." "Communicate with the planet?" Kaelin asked, skepticism evident in his tone. "Xylos is alive, human, not just hosting life, but alive itself in ways your science doesn't yet comprehend." She placed her palm flat against the crystal. "Through these, we can hear its voice, feel its moods, seek its guidance." Before Kaelin could inquire further, a commotion at the chamber entrance drew their attention. Several warriors rushed in, supporting injured comrades. Elder Tarek hurried to meet them, his face grave as they exchanged urgent words. Naya stood, listening, her expression growing increasingly alarmed. "Neocorp," she explained to Kaelin. "They've deployed hunter-killer drones throughout the forest. These warriors were on patrol and were attacked." Kaelin's stomach sank. "They're looking for us, for me and Lyra. They're trying to eliminate witnesses and punish those who attack their facility." "More than that," Naya said grimly. "The warriors report the drones are mapping the forest systematically, searching for something specific. Elder Tarek believes they're trying to find the heart." The implications were clear. If Neocorp discovered this last sanctuary, the remaining indigenous population would be captured or killed, and the heart of Xylos' unique ecosystem would be destroyed for profit. Kaelin stood, approaching Elder Tarek despite his guard's objections. "Elder, I can help. My scanner can detect the drone's energy signatures and predict their search patterns. I might be able to create a countermeasure, or at least provide early warning." Tarek regarded him with suspicion, but desperation outweighed caution. "Show me." Over the next few hours, Kaelin worked with several of the more technically inclined survivors to establish a perimeter warning system, using his scanner and components salvaged from their limited technological supplies. The work was challenging, combining earth science with the indigenous people's unique understanding of Xylos' ecosystem, but progress was steady. As they worked, Kaelin learned more about the community, how they had once thrived across Xylos, living in harmony with the planet in small, scattered clans. How Neocorp's arrival had disrupted everything, driving them into hiding, capturing many for research, destroying ancient groves and sacred sites in the pursuit of rare minerals and biological compounds. By nightfall, they had established a rudimentary early warning network, but Kaelin knew it was only a temporary solution. The perimeter extended barely 2 kilometers around the heart, and Neocorp's search grid would eventually find them. What they needed was a permanent end to the threat. He was examining the ancient crystal structures, wondering if they might somehow be incorporated into their defenses, when a familiar voice spoke behind him. Always the scientist, even in a crisis. Kaelin turned to find Lyra standing there, her injuries bandaged, her posture still favoring her uninjured leg, but otherwise remarkably recovered. Relief flooded through him. "Lyra, you should be resting." "I've rested enough," she said dismissively, though her eyes held something warmer than her tone suggested. "Naya told me what you've done to help." "It's unexpected, is it?" Kaelin asked. "I thought I'd made my position quite clear when I carried you through a toxic waste pipe and half a jungle to get you to safety." A smile flickered across her face. "Perhaps I'm slow to trust. Perhaps you have reason to be," he acknowledged. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," which is more than can be said for many of my people. She approached the crystal structure he'd been examining. "You're wondering if the heart can help us against Neocorp." It wasn't a question. Kaelin nodded. "These structures, they're ancient technology, aren't they? Not just spiritual objects, but actual functional technology." "Yes and no," Lyra replied. "They function, but not in ways your science would recognize. They connect to Xylos itself, to the planetary consciousness that flows through every living thing here." "Naya mentioned something similar," Kaelin said, "but I'm having trouble with the concept of a planetary consciousness." Lyra regarded him thoughtfully. "Perhaps it's easier to show than explain." She held out her hand. "Will you trust me?" Kaelin took her hand without hesitation. "I already do." Her fingers tightened around his as she led him toward the largest of the crystal formations. The guards watched but didn't interfere. Apparently, Lyra's sponsorship was sufficient protection now. As they approached, the crystal began to pulse more brightly, responding to their presence. "Place your hand here," Lyra instructed, guiding his palm to a specific facet of the crystal. "And open your mind. Don't analyze, don't question, just feel." Kaelin followed her instructions, expecting nothing but the cool touch of crystalline material. What he experienced instead defied description, a sudden rush of sensation, of awareness expanding beyond his physical form. He gasped as his consciousness seemed to merge with something vast and ancient and utterly alien, yet somehow familiar at its core. Images flooded his mind. The jungle as a single interconnected organism, energy flowing through root systems and airborne spores, and symbiotic relationships, so complex they formed a kind of distributed neural network. He sensed the damage Neocorp had inflicted, like wounds in this greater organism, and the planet's increasing distress. And he sensed something else, a potential response, a planetary defense mechanism that remained dormant only because activating it might cause as much destruction as the threat it meant to counter. When Lyra finally pulled his hand away, Kaelin staggered, overwhelmed by the experience. She steadied him, concern evident in her expression. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. "Everything," Kaelin whispered. "Xylos is alive, truly alive, in a way I never imagined possible. It's hurting Lyra. What Neocorp is doing isn't just exploiting resources. It's wounding a sentient being." Lyra nodded, unsurprised. "Now you understand why we fight so desperately. It isn't just for ourselves. It's for Xylos itself." "I saw something else," Kaelin continued, his mind racing with implications. "A defense mechanism, something powerful, something ancient. Why haven't your people activated it?" "Because the cost would be too high," Elder Tarek answered, approaching them. "The purification would indeed drive the invaders from Xylos, but it would also destroy much of what we're trying to protect. The heart would survive, but the outer forests, the plains, the rivers, all would be transformed, purged of anything Xylos deems invasive. Including us," Lyra added softly. "We may have adapted to Xylos over generations, but we are not originally of this world. Our ancestors came from elsewhere, just as yours did from Earth. In the purification, Xylos makes no such distinctions, anything not part of. its original pattern would be eliminated. Kalen's scientific mind rebelled against what he was hearing, yet the experience with the crystal had been too profound to dismiss. There must be another way. My distress signal may never have reached anyone, Tarek interrupted. And even if it did, how long before help arrives? Days? Weeks? By then, Neocorp will have found us. A distant alarm interrupted their conversation. One of the perimeter sensors Kalen had helped install. Naya rushed toward them, her expression urgent. Hunter drones approaching from the north, she reported. At least a dozen, with human operators following behind. They found a trail leading to the heart. Elder Tarek's face hardened with resolve. Then we have no choice. Prepare the evacuation route to the deep caves. We've prepared for this possibility. He turned to Lyra. Your outsider has helped us, but now he must leave. His presence endangers us all. No, Lyra said firmly, surprising both Tarek and Kalen. He stays with me. He's proven himself an ally. Lyra, Tarek began, his tone warning. I've lost everyone, Elder, she interrupted, her voice tight with emotion. Everyone. I won't abandon the one person who came back for me when he could have saved himself. The Elder stared at her for a long moment before sighing. Very well, but he is your responsibility. He turned away, barking orders to organize the evacuation. Kalen looked at Lyra, deeply moved by her defense. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she replied, though her eyes betrayed her feelings. We still need to survive this. The evacuation began immediately. Supplies gathered. The young and injured led toward a hidden passage at the back of the massive tree chamber. Kalen helped where he could, carrying equipment and offering his scanner to monitor the approaching threats. The drones are spreading out, he reported to Lyra as they worked. They're establishing a perimeter. Standard tactical containment procedure. How long before they reach us? An hour, maybe less. Kalen studied the scanner readings more carefully. Wait, they're not just advancing. They're placing something at regular intervals. Some kind of devices. Lyra's expression darkened. Sonic disruptors. They use them to disorient the larger predators, but they have another effect. They interfere with the bioluminescent communication network of the forest. They're cutting the heart off from the rest of Xylos. Why would they? Kalen began, then understood. They're isolating this area so they can destroy it without triggering a wider response from the ecosystem. Yes, they've learned from their previous encounters with Xylos' defenses. Lyra checked her weapons, a knife and what appeared to be a salvaged Neocorp energy pistol. The evacuation will take at least 2 hours. We need to buy them time. How? Kalen asked. There are too many drones, and the human operators will have military-grade weapons. Lyra's eyes met his, determination and something else, something deeper, shining in their amber depths. We give them what they want. A distraction. 2 targets fleeing away from the heart, drawing their forces after us. Kalen realized what she was suggesting. A suicide mission. Not necessarily, she countered. Just a very dangerous one. If we can lead them back toward the damaged facility, the instabilities you created in their systems might provide opportunities. The logic was sound, if desperate. All right, Kalen agreed. But we need a better advantage than just running and hoping. Let me think. He turned to the crystal structures, remembering the connection he'd felt to Xylos itself. An idea began to form. Reckless, possibly foolish, but potentially powerful. Lyra, he said slowly, when I connected with Xylos through the crystal, I sensed that the purification wasn't the only defense mechanism available. There were smaller interventions possible, more targeted responses. The elders have spoken of such things, Lyra acknowledged, but the knowledge of how to communicate such specific requests to Xylos was lost generations ago. Maybe not lost, Kalen suggested. Just translated differently. Your people communicate with Xylos through ritual, through marking patterns, through generations of evolved understanding. But I communicated directly, mind to mind, concept to concept. Perhaps my outsider perspective allows me to ask for something specific. Lyra studied him intently. What are you suggesting? Let me try to request help from Xylos. Not the full purification, but a targeted response against the immediate threat. A surgical strike rather than an apocalypse. And if you trigger the full purification by accident? Lyra asked, though her tone suggested she was already considering his proposal. Then at least your people will have reached the deep caves, Kalen replied honestly. And we'll have tried something besides running and dying. After a moment's consideration, Lyra nodded. Do it. I'll create a diversion to buy you time. Before she could move away, Kalen caught her arm. Be careful. Always, she replied with a fierce smile, then was gone, moving swiftly toward the chamber entrance where the first signs of the approaching threat were becoming apparent. Distant flashes of light, the faint whine of drone engines. Alone now, Kalen approached the largest crystal formation at the center of the heart. The evacuation continued around him, but the remaining inhabitants gave him a wide berth, eyeing the human with suspicion or curiosity as they gathered their most precious possessions. Kalen placed both hands on the crystal, closing his eyes and clearing his mind as best he could. The connection came more quickly this time, the alien consciousness of Xylos flooding into him. Vast and incomprehensible in its totality, yet somehow understandable in fragments. He focused his thoughts, projecting images of the drones, the disruptors, the specific threat they posed to this location. He felt Xylos's awareness shift, focusing on these intrusions, assessing them with an inhuman perspective that spanned millennia rather than moments. For a terrifying instant, Kalen sensed the purification response gathering, a catastrophic release of energy that would indeed eliminate the threat, along with much of the planet's surface ecosystem. He frantically redirected, showing alternatives, targeted responses, limited interventions, the surgical strike he had proposed to Lyra. The consciousness seemed to hesitate, unfamiliar with such restraint, such precision. Kalen pressed harder, emphasizing the value of preservation, of measured response. He shared his own memories of Earth's ecosystems damaged by overreaction, of forests destroyed to save them, of balance lost in the name of protection. Something shifted. The vast awareness seemed to fragment into smaller, more manageable components, localized responses rather than a planetary convulsion. Kalen felt acceptance, then a withdrawing as Xylos prepared to act in its own way, at its own pace. When he broke contact with the crystal, Kalen staggered, drained by the effort. The chamber around him had emptied considerably, the evacuation well underway. Only a few warriors remained, preparing final defenses. He made his way to the entrance, where sounds of conflict had already erupted. Outside, chaos reigned. Lyra had created her diversion, a series of explosive charges set among the approaching Neocorp forces, scattering their neat perimeter and creating confusion in their ranks. She fought with incredible agility despite her injuries, darting between trees that seemed to bend cooperatively out of her way, providing cover exactly when needed. But more remarkable was what the jungle itself was doing. Plants were moving, not swaying in the wind, but actively reaching, grasping, entangling. The bioluminescent algae in nearby pools had become highly agitated, spraying into the air in blinding clouds that confused the drone's sensors. Even the soil itself seemed to shift, becoming suddenly unstable beneath Neocorp equipment, swallowing smaller devices whole. Xylos was responding, not with the cataclysmic purification, but with precisely targeted defensive measures. The planetary consciousness was acting with a surgical precision that, according to Elder Tarek, had been thought impossible. Kalen joined the fight, using his pulse pistol to disable drones while avoiding direct confrontation with human operators where possible. He made his way toward Lyra, who had worked her way to the edge of the conflict, drawing a significant portion of the Neocorp forces away from the heart as planned. It worked, he called to her, as they sheltered behind a massive root structure. Xylos is responding, targeted controlled response. Lyra's eyes widened as she observed the jungle's coordinated defense. Impossible. The elders have tried for generations to communicate such specific requests. Maybe an outsider perspective helps, Kalen suggested. Or maybe Xylos is evolving its own communication abilities. A nearby explosion cut short their discussion. The Neocorp forces, realizing they were losing control of the situation, had started deploying more destructive weapons, incendiary devices that threatened to ignite the jungle itself. "They're getting desperate," Lyra observed grimly. "Time for Phase 2. We need to draw them further away." They moved through the jungle, staying just visible enough to be pursued, but using their knowledge of the terrain to avoid direct confrontation. Xylos' assistance made their passage easier. Branches moved aside for them. Bioluminescent patches brightened to light their way, while dimming to confuse pursuers. Their destination was a region Lyra called the Mirrored Pools, a series of reflective water bodies whose mineral content created perfect reflections that disoriented those unfamiliar with the area. There, they hoped to lose the remaining pursuers, or at least thin their numbers further. As they ran, Kalen's scanner detected a new signal, powerful, coming from above the canopy. "Lyra," he gasped, "something's approaching." Not Neocorp, different signature. Before she could respond, the canopy above them was split by a blinding light. For a moment, Kalen feared Neocorp had brought in orbital weapons, but as the light focused into a spotlight beam, he recognized the configuration. "Colonial Authority rescue vessel," he breathed. "They received my distress call." The massive ship hovered above the canopy, its systems scanning the area. Smaller craft deployed from its underside, targeting the Neocorp forces with precision weapons that disabled rather than destroyed. Capture, not elimination. "Perfect timing," Lyra remarked dryly, though relief was evident in her voice. The arrival of the Colonial Authority vessel changed the dynamics of the conflict immediately. Neocorp forces scattered, some surrendering, others fleeing deeper into the jungle where Xylos' defenses awaited them. Within an hour, the immediate threat had been neutralized. A landing party found Kalen and Lyra at the edge of the Mirrored Pools, both exhausted but alive. The team leader, a Captain Evers, approached with a mix of relief and professional concern. "Researcher Reeves," she greeted him formally. "Your distress signal was received 4 days ago. We came as quickly as regulations allowed." Her gaze shifted to Lyra, noting her injuries and her obvious non-human features. "You'll need to explain a great deal." "I will," Kalen promised. "But first, we need guarantees. This planet and its people require protection. Real protection, not just classifications in a database." Captain Evers frowned. "That's beyond my authority." "Then find someone with the proper authority," Kalen insisted, "because I won't leave without those guarantees." The following days passed in a blur of activity. Colonial Authority forces established a base camp near the crash site of Kalen's research vessel, carefully avoiding the heart, which remained hidden from official documentation at Kalen's insistence. Medical teams treated the injured, including a properly structured treatment for Lyra's wounds. Neocorp's operation was dismantled, its personnel arrested for multiple violations of colonial law, illegal resource extraction, violence against indigenous sentient beings, unauthorized experimentation, environmental damage, and more. The evidence Kalen had transmitted, combined with what was discovered on-site, guaranteed severe penalties. The survivors from the heart were cautiously emerging, establishing tentative communication with colonial representatives under Lyra's guidance. Elder Tarek remained suspicious but pragmatic. The immediate threat of extinction had passed, and new possibilities were emerging. A week after the rescue, Kalen found himself standing with Lyra at the edge of a bioluminescent grove, watching the lights pulse in patterns that now seemed almost meaningful to him after his connection with Xylos. "The Colonial Authority has granted Xylos protected status," he told her. "Full quarantine, no exploitation, limited scientific observation only, and that with your people's explicit permission." Lyra nodded, satisfaction in her expression. "And you? Will you return to the stars?" Kalen had been considering this question for days. "My official mission is complete, or rather, transformed into something much more significant. I've been offered a position as liaison between your people and the Colonial Scientific Division. I could stay, help establish proper protocols for interaction, ensure your sovereignty is respected." And is that what you want? Lyra asked, her eyes searching his. What I want, Kalen said carefully, is to continue learning about Xylos, about its unique ecosystem, about its extraordinary inhabitants. He paused, gathering courage, particularly one inhabitant who started as my captor and somehow became something much more important. Lyra's expression softened. Even though I threatened to gut you when we first met, especially because of that, Kalen laughed. You were protecting your home, your world. I respect that. I admire it. He hesitated, then continued more seriously. Lyra, I know your people have suffered tremendously at the hands of outsiders. I know trust comes hard-earned. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to stay, not just as a liaison or a scientist, but as someone who has come to care deeply for both this world and one of its most remarkable defenders. Lyra stepped closer, her movement fluid despite her healing injuries. The elders would say such feelings are unwise, that our worlds are too different, our paths too divergent. And what would Lyra say? Kalen asked softly. Lyra would say, she replied, reaching up to trace the pattern of bioluminescent markings that still faintly showed on his skin, that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the harshest circumstances, that someone willing to face death for a world not his own, for people not his own, might be worth the risk of trust. Her fingers intertwined with his, even worth the risk of more than trust. Above them, the bioluminescent canopy brightened, as if Xylos itself approved of this unlikely connection. The planet that had nearly been destroyed by human greed might now find its salvation through human compassion, and through the courage of its defenders who dared to bridge the gap between worlds. Stay, Lyra said simply. Learn our ways. Teach us yours. Help us build something new from the ruins of what was lost. I can do that, Kalen agreed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Though I should warn you, botanists can be stubbornly detail-oriented and prone to long lectures about photosynthesis. Lyra's laugh was like nothing he'd heard before, part purr, part melody, entirely captivating. And I should warn you that my people sleep in trees and eat things that would probably horrify your delicate human digestive system. Fair warning, Kalen acknowledged with a smile. Sounds like we both have a lot to adjust to. In the distance, the Colonial Authority vessel prepared for departure, its mission transitioning from rescue to establishing diplomatic relations. Most of its personnel would leave, respecting the new quarantine protocols, but Kalen would remain behind, a bridge between worlds, a translator of cultures. As twilight descended, the bioluminescence of Xylos intensified, transforming the jungle into a galaxy of living lights. Kalen and Lyra walked together toward the heart, where her people waited to begin the difficult but essential work of building trust and healing wounds, both those inflicted on bodies and those inflicted on worlds. By the way, Kalen said as they walked, I've been meaning to ask. That first day, with the Thorn, you said if you keep looking at me like that, I'll pounce. What exactly did you mean? Lyra's eyes gleamed mischievously in the bioluminescent light. Exactly what I said. My people don't waste words, Kalen. When we threaten, we mean it. When we warn, we mean it. And when we invite. She let the implication hang in the air between them, her tail swishing playfully behind her. I see, Kalen replied, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. And if I were to look at you like that now? Why don't you try and find out, she challenged, but the usual edge in her voice had softened, replaced by something warmer and more intimate. Kalen held her gaze deliberately, allowing all the admiration, attraction, and affection he'd been carefully restraining to show plainly on his face. Lyra held his gaze for a long moment, her pupils dilating slightly, before she suddenly moved. Not the predatory pounce she had once threatened, but a fluid motion that brought her directly against him, her face tilted up to his. Your species has some strange customs, she murmured. Do you also believe in sealing promises with actions rather than words? We do, Kalen answered, gently tracing the pattern of scales along her jawline. It's an ancient tradition. Their kiss was tentative at first, an exploration of differences as much as a confirmation of connection. But it deepened quickly, the shared dangers and mutual respect of the past days transforming into something new and powerful. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, the bioluminescent plants around them were pulsing in synchronized patterns, as if Xylos itself was celebrating this unexpected union of different worlds. "The elders will be scandalized," Lyra said with a small laugh. "Let them be," Kalen replied. "We've earned the right to find happiness where we can." He tucked a strand of her hair behind one pointed ear. "Besides, I think Xylos approves." As if in response, a nearby flower suddenly bloomed, releasing a cloud of glowing pollen that danced around them like stars. "It does," Lyra agreed softly. "It recognizes that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the strongest symbiosis." Hand in hand, they continued toward the heart, with a future of Xylos, and their own intertwined futures waited to be written. Behind them, the colonial vessel's lights dimmed as it prepared for departure, leaving this extraordinary world to heal and thrive under the protection of its own defenders and their unlikely ally from the stars. In the days and weeks that followed, a new balance began to emerge. The remaining Neocorp operatives were removed from the planet, their equipment dismantled or repurposed to restore damaged areas of the ecosystem. Under Kalen's guidance, a small scientific outpost was established at a respectful distance from indigenous territories, staffed by researchers who understood the value of observation over intervention. Lyra took on the role of ambassador between her people and the colonial authority, her natural intelligence and fierce protective instincts, making her an effective advocate for Xylos' interests. Elder Tarek, initially skeptical of this new arrangement, gradually came to appreciate the advantages of having humans as allies rather than enemies, particularly humans who respected boundaries and honored agreements. Together, Kalen and Lyra mapped the extent of the damage Neocorp had inflicted, establishing restoration protocols that worked with Xylos' natural healing capabilities rather than imposing external solutions. Through their connection with the crystal structures at the heart, they could communicate directly with the planetary consciousness, guiding its responses in ways that accelerated recovery without disrupting delicate balances. Their personal relationship evolved alongside their professional one, a constant dance of discovery, adjustment, and deepening connection. Cultural differences provided both challenges and moments of unexpected joy. Kalen learned to sleep comfortably in the tree dwellings Lyra's people preferred, while she developed a taste for certain human foods brought from the scientific outpost. 6 months after the confrontation with Neocorp, they stood together at the site of Kalen's original crash, now transformed into a thriving grove where the jungle had reclaimed the few remnants of the vessel too damaged to salvage. "Hard to believe it all started here," Kalen remarked, noting how the bioluminescent plants had incorporated pieces of his ship into their growth patterns, metal and circuitry becoming scaffolding for new life. "The elders would say it was Xylos' plan all along," Lyra replied, leaning comfortably against him, "that your crash was no accident but a deliberate summons." "And what do you say?" Kalen asked, his arm around her shoulders. Lyra considered this, her tail curling thoughtfully. "I say that sometimes the universe creates exactly what is needed, exactly when it is needed. Your people would call it coincidence or probability. Mine would call it destiny or divine intervention. Perhaps both perspectives hold truth." "A diplomatic answer," Kalen teased. "You've been spending too much time with the colonial representatives." She nudged him playfully. "And you've been spending too much time with the crystal formations. Yesterday, you were communicating with plants and didn't even notice when I entered the research station." "I noticed," Kalen protested with a smile. "I just prioritized finishing the communication first." "Prioritized," Lyra repeated, her tone mock serious. "Over me? Perhaps I need to remind you of certain priorities." With the lightning-quick reflexes that still occasionally took him by surprise, she pounced, taking them both down onto the soft moss covering the forest floor. Pinned beneath her, Kalen laughed, reaching up to trace the patterns of her facial markings. "Familiar now, beloved." "Consider me reminded," he said softly. Their kiss was interrupted by a soft chiming from Kalen's communication device, a signal from the research station. Lyra growled softly in frustration, but rolled gracefully to her feet, extending a hand to help him up. "Duty calls," she sighed. "Always at the worst moments," Kalen agreed, checking the message. "The new botanical samples from the eastern sector have been processed. The results show promising medicinal properties." Lyra's expression brightened. "The healing vines? Those could help with the respiratory illness affecting the northern clan." "Exactly," Kalen nodded. "This is the positive exchange we've been working for. Knowledge shared to benefit both our peoples." They made their way back toward the research station, discussing the potential applications of the discovery. Around them, Xylos pulsed with life and light, the bioluminescence more vibrant than ever as the planet recovered from its wounds. The path they walked had been created not by clearing the jungle, but by asking it to shape itself, a physical manifestation of the new relationship between humans and this extraordinary world. At a particularly beautiful viewpoint overlooking a valley where 1,000 different species of bioluminescent plants created a tapestry of living light, they paused, drawn by the sheer beauty of what they had helped preserve. "Whatever brought us together," Kalen said, "crash or summons or cosmic coincidence, I'm grateful every day." "As am I," Lyra replied, her eyes reflecting the valley's glow. "Though I still maintain that threatening to gut you was a perfectly reasonable first response to your intrusion." "Of course," Kalen agreed solemnly. "And extracting a poisonous thorn while you glared daggers at me was a perfectly reasonable second step in our budding relationship." Lyra laughed, the sound harmonizing with the ambient hum of the forest. "Perhaps we should include these details in the official diplomatic record." Successful interspecies relations began with knife threats and medical emergencies. "I'm sure it would set a promising precedent," Kalen replied with a grin. They continued their journey, walking the fine line between two worlds, not fully belonging to either, yet creating something new and valuable at their intersection. Behind them, their footprints glowed briefly in the responsive soil of Xylos, marking their passage before fading back into the greater patterns of the living planet. Ahead, challenges waited: political complications from the colonial authority, lingering distrust among some of Lyra's people, the ongoing recovery of damaged ecosystems. But they would face these together, united by a connection forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. And sometimes, in quiet moments when they connected with Xylos through the ancient crystals, they sensed a peculiar satisfaction from the planetary consciousness, as if this union between different species, different perspectives, different worlds, represented exactly the kind of evolutionary adaptation that had made the extraordinary ecosystem of this bioluminescent jungle possible in the first place. It wasn't the future either of them had imagined when Kalen's ship crashed through the canopy months ago. It was something neither of their peoples had quite prepared them for. But like the hybrid plants they had discovered thriving in the boundary zones between different forest regions, their relationship drew strength from its very uniqueness. "We should return," Lyra said eventually, though she made no move to leave the spectacular view. "The elders are expecting a progress report, and your research team will be analyzing those samples." "They can wait a few more minutes," Kalen replied, drawing her closer. "Some moments deserve to be fully experienced before they're analyzed and documented." Lyra smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "A most unscientific attitude, Dr. Reeves." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but even science begins with wonder." Around them, the bioluminescent jungle of Xylos continued its ancient rhythms, adapted now to include new elements, new possibilities, new connections. And at the heart of the great living organism that was this extraordinary planet, the crystals pulsed with a pattern that might, to a careful observer, have resembled the synchronized beating of two very different hearts, finding their common rhythm in a universe of endless, beautiful variation.